The roar of the Filipino crowd has followed Eala all the way across North America. And now the stakes in Cincinnati have reached another level. 9 top 10 victories are already part of Eala's growing resume. A $7.4 million prize pool is on the line at the Cincinnati Open, and standing between her and the round of 16 is a familiar name from the past. The stage was set at the Lindner Family Tennis Center. The atmosphere was building, and across the net stood Elena Gabriela Ruse, the Romanian who had once delivered one of the most painful defeats of Eala's young career. Their first meeting came in the 2024 U.S. Open qualifying tournament, when Eala was still fighting to establish herself on the professional stage. Ruse won that encounter in 3 sets, 3-6, 6-1, 6-4, ending Eala's hopes of reaching her first Grand Slam main draw appearance. At the time, Eala was ranked number 153 in the world, while Ruse was ranked number 122. That defeat was another reminder of just how much work remained ahead of the young Filipina. But nearly 2 years later, everything had changed. The player who walked onto the court in Cincinnati was no longer the same teenager searching for her breakthrough. This was world number 20 Eala, a WTA 500 champion, a player with multiple victories over the world's best, and one of the fastest rising stars on tour. Since that first meeting, Eala had climbed nearly 130 places in the rankings, while Ruse had slipped to number 74. And yet, the match began with a familiar warning. Ruse broke Eala's serve in the opening game, briefly threatening to turn the clock back and recreate the disappointment of 2024. But this time, Eala refused to let the past dictate the present. Something immediately clicked into place. She responded with relentless aggression, controlled the rallies from the baseline, and began attacking Ruse's second serve with incredible precision. From that point forward, the momentum belonged almost entirely to the Filipina. Eala ripped through 6 consecutive games to close out the opening set 6-1. Despite the sweltering Cincinnati humidity, her intensity never dropped. She broke Ruse in the 4th game, broke again in the 6th, and then calmly served out the set with the confidence of a player who knew exactly where she belonged. This was not simply a match against an opponent. It was an opportunity to erase an old memory, and Eala was taking full advantage of it. The second set began in almost identical fashion. Eala immediately seized control and raced out to a 3-0 advantage. But just as the match appeared to be heading toward a straightforward finish, an unexpected interruption changed everything. With Eala serving in the 4th game, play was suspended because of a lightning warning. Ruse had also been dealing with a right foot injury and had already taken a medical timeout. Before the match could resume, the Romanian was forced to retire. The official result was a 6-1, 3-0 retirement victory for Eala. It was not the dramatic conclusion anyone had imagined, but the significance was impossible to ignore. The player who had once been stopped by Ruse in U.S. Open qualifying had now moved past her on one of the biggest stages of the North American swing. Eala had completed her revenge, improved her record to 8-1 during the North American hardcourt swing, and continued an extraordinary streak against opponents who had previously defeated her. She had now won 8 consecutive matches against players who had beaten her earlier in her career. Afterward, Eala kept her focus on the tennis rather than the unusual ending. She explained that she had been striking the ball well, staying focused, and doing a good job of keeping herself in the zone. But she also made sure to acknowledge her opponent. Nobody wants to finish a match because of an injury, and Eala expressed her hope that Gabriela Ruse would recover quickly. The victory was important, but there was clearly a bigger picture in Eala's mind, because there was no time to celebrate for long. Waiting on the other side of the draw was an entirely different challenge. World number 10 Amanda Anisimova was next, and this was not just another opponent. Anisimova entered the Cincinnati Open as the 9th seed at the $7.4 million WTA 1000 tournament, carrying an impressive resume of her own. The 24-year-old American had already reached 2 Grand Slam finals, including the Wimbledon and US Open finals in 2025, and had established herself as one of the most dangerous, aggressive players on the WTA Tour. She had also captured major WTA 1000 titles at the Qatar Open and China Open, proving that she could perform under enormous pressure against the strongest players in the world. Now she was preparing to face Eala for the very first time. Interestingly, Anisimova's reaction to the matchup was not fear or frustration. It was excitement. She had clearly been following Eala's incredible rise and understood exactly what kind of atmosphere would be waiting for her. Anisimova acknowledged that Eala had been having an incredible season, praised her as a great player with a huge fan base, and said she was genuinely looking forward to the challenge. And then came the part that made the upcoming match even more intriguing. Anisimova knew the stadium would probably be filled with Filipino supporters, but instead of viewing that as a disadvantage, she welcomed it. She said she loved playing in packed stadiums and enjoyed a great atmosphere. Even if most of the crowd would be supporting Eala, Anisimova intended to feed off that energy rather than allow it to overwhelm her. That attitude was important because the Filipino support surrounding Eala had become one of the biggest stories of the North American swing. Everywhere Eala went, the crowd seemed to grow larger. In Toronto, Filipino fans had transformed the tournament atmosphere. In Washington, her run to the title created another wave of attention. And now Cincinnati was preparing for the possibility of another packed stadium with thousands of fans chanting her name. But Eala knew that the crowd alone could not win this match. Anisimova brings a completely different level of pressure. Her game is built around taking the ball early, striking aggressively from the baseline, and using a powerful forehand and exceptionally clean backhand to dictate points before her opponent has time to settle. She has Grand Slam experience, WTA 1000 experience, and the ability to turn a match around with a few explosive games. On American soil, in front of a home crowd, she would be determined to make a statement. But Eala had already shown that she could handle exactly this type of challenge. She had defeated multiple top 10 opponents during her remarkable season, including Jessica Pegula in the Washington final. She had already proven that big names no longer intimidated her. In fact, they appeared to bring out an even higher level of tennis. Another victory over a top 10 opponent would give Eala the 10th top 10 win of her career and further strengthen the argument that she is no longer simply a promising young player. She is becoming a genuine threat to the established stars of women's tennis. That is what made this matchup so compelling. On one side was Amanda Anisimova, a former world number 3, 2-time Grand Slam finalist, multiple-time WTA champion, and one of the most powerful ball strikers in the sport. On the other was Eala, the 20-year-old Filipina who had spent the season tearing through expectations, climbing the rankings, collecting major wins, and turning every tournament into a showcase for the growing Filipino tennis community. They had never played each other before, which meant there was no head-to-head history to rely on, no previous match to analyze, no familiar patterns. It would be a completely new battle. And perhaps most importantly, both players were coming into the match with confidence. Anisimova had the experience and the home advantage. Eala had momentum, belief, and an army of supporters ready to turn the Lindner Family Tennis Center into something that felt more like Manila than Cincinnati. The revenge against Ruse was complete. The past had finally been put to rest. But now came the real test, a top 10 opponent, a packed stadium, a massive opportunity, and a place in the round of 16 hanging in the balance. For Eala, this was another chance to prove that her incredible rise was not a temporary surge. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The roar that greeted Eala at the Lindner Family Tennis Center was not the polite applause normally given to an emerging star. It sounded more like the welcome reserved for a returning champion. Filipino flags filled the stands. Familiar chants of Eala echoed around the stadium, and supporters who had followed her journey from Washington to Toronto had now crossed the border to Cincinnati. And the most remarkable part was that Eala had not even played a single point yet. The phenomenon that had caught tournament officials off guard in Washington and Toronto had officially arrived in Ohio, and once again, Alex Eala was proving that her rise was about much more than what happened on the tennis court. In Washington, tournament chairman Mark Hine revealed that a huge majority of ticket inquiries were connected to Eala. In Toronto, the demand became so intense that organizers moved one of her matches from a smaller court to the main stadium, where more than 10,000 fans packed the venue. The tournament even introduced Filipino favorites such as chicken adobo and lumpia to its food offerings, showing just how deeply Eala's presence was influencing the entire event. Now, Cincinnati was experiencing that same wave. The question was no longer whether Alex Eala could attract a crowd. The question was how large that crowd could become. After her victory over Gabriela Ruse, Eala herself admitted that she was amazed by the atmosphere. She explained that it was her first time playing in Cincinnati and that she did not know what to expect, but she was incredibly happy with the reception. The roughly 4,000-seat stadium had been transformed by Filipino supporters into something that felt less like a neutral venue and more like a home court. Every cheer, every flag, and every chant reinforced the same message. Alex Eala was no longer simply representing herself. She was carrying an entire tennis community with her. Amanda Anisimova knew exactly what was coming. The American had done her homework, and she had already witnessed the power of Eala's fan base earlier in the season. She understood that every time Eala walked onto the court, the atmosphere could change instantly. Anisimova openly praised Eala's supporters and said that the atmosphere surrounding her matches looked incredible. She had never faced Eala before, but she knew the Filipina had been having an extraordinary season and had developed one of the most passionate fan bases on tour. And Anisimova's reaction was particularly interesting because she did not sound intimidated. She sounded excited. She said she loved playing in packed stadiums and enjoyed the energy created by a loud crowd. Even if the majority of the spectators would probably be supporting Eala, Anisimova said she intended to use that energy to fuel her own performance rather than allowing it to become a distraction. That attitude would be tested the moment the match began. The crowd following Eala from Washington to Toronto had now arrived in Cincinnati, and the American star had already experienced just how powerful Filipino support could be. Earlier in the season in Dubai, Anisimova had stayed to watch part of one of Eala's matches because she was drawn in by the atmosphere. She later recalled seeing the beginning of the match and sticking around because the energy inside the stadium was so impressive. But Cincinnati promised to be even louder. The $7.4 million Cincinnati Open was about to become another showcase for Filipino tennis. And for Anisimova, the challenge would be unlike anything she had experienced against most opponents. She was the home player, but the atmosphere could feel completely different from a traditional home advantage. The vast majority of the crowd was expected to support Eala. Every big point won by the Filipino would likely trigger another wave of noise, while every mistake from Anisimova could bring an equally loud reaction. It meant the American would have to find a way to perform under an enormous amount of emotional pressure. But perhaps the biggest reason the matchup had generated so much attention was that Eala had already given fans plenty of reasons to believe. Her victory over Gabriela Ruse was not simply about revenge for a painful defeat from 2024. It was another chapter in a season that has completely changed the trajectory of Philippine tennis. Eala had now won 8 of her previous 9 matches, a remarkable run that included her breakthrough WTA title in Washington and a round of 16 appearances in Toronto. Even the statistics from her match against Ruse showed how dominant Eala had become. She won 71% of the points played behind Ruse's first serve and an astonishing 78% behind the Romanian's second serve. After dropping her opening service game, Eala responded by winning 6 games in a row to take the first set 6-1. She then raced to a 3-0 lead in the second before the lightning warning suspended play and ruse was ultimately unable to continue. The final score may have ended through retirement, but Eala's performance before the interruption had already sent a powerful message. She had arrived in Cincinnati ready, and the broader numbers make that message even harder to ignore. Eala had already collected 9 top 10 victories in her career, with 8 of those coming during the extraordinary 2026 season. She had defeated some of the biggest names in women's tennis, including Iga Swiatek, Jessica Pegula, Elena Rybakina, Madison Keys, Coco Gauff, Jasmine Paolini, and Alina Svitolina. These were not isolated victories against top players. They were becoming a recurring feature of Eala's season. That is why the word fluke is becoming harder and harder to use when discussing Alex Eala. One upset can be dismissed as a surprise. 2 can be called a hot streak. But when a player repeatedly defeats top-ranked opponents across different tournaments and different surfaces, the explanation starts to change. At some point, it is no longer an upset story. It becomes a pattern. And Eala now had another opportunity to strengthen that pattern. A victory over Amanda Anisimova would give her the 10th top 10 victory of her career and another massive statement at a WTA 1000 event. It would also further reinforce her position among the most dangerous players on the tour. The significance would be enormous for a player who was still outside the top 100 only a relatively short time ago. Her ranking rise tells the same story. Eala had climbed to a new career-high position around number 18 in the live rankings, continuing to move past established names and closing the gap on the players directly ahead of her. Because she did not compete at the Cincinnati event the previous year, every ranking point earned this time represented an opportunity to add to her total rather than defend an old result. That made every victory even more valuable. But standing in her way was a player with an equally impressive resume. Amanda Anisimova had reached a career-high ranking of number 3 earlier in her career and had already established herself as one of the game's elite competitors. She had won major WTA 1000 titles, including triumphs at the Qatar Open and China Open, and had reached 2 Grand Slam finals in 2025. She had experienced the pressure of playing for major championships, faced the world's best players, and performed on the biggest courts in the sport. And now she was playing at home. On paper, the matchup looked like a classic battle between experience and momentum. Anisimova had the power, the home advantage, and the Grand Slam pedigree. Eala had the confidence, the crowd, and one of the most impressive collections of top 10 victories on tour this season. But Eala had already shown that pressure does not scare her. She had defeated Jessica Pegula in the Washington final. She had taken down multiple established stars during her rise. She had walked into packed stadiums where thousands of fans expected her to win, and somehow continued to produce her best tennis. Every new challenge seemed to add another layer to her confidence. And now came perhaps one of the biggest tests yet. Amanda Anisimova was not going to simply hand Eala another top 10 victory. The American knew exactly what was at stake. She knew the crowd would be loud. She knew Eala would have momentum. And she knew that beating the Filipino would require her to play at an extremely high level from the opening point. But Eala knew something too. She had already proven that she belonged in these matches. The rankings mattered. The statistics mattered. The prize money mattered. The top 10 record mattered. But once the first ball was struck, none of those numbers would win a single point for her. The only number that would ultimately matter was the one on the scoreboard. And that is what made this Cincinnati showdown so compelling. The Lindner Family Tennis Center was ready. Thousands of Filipino supporters were ready. Amanda Anisimova was ready. And Alex Eala was standing on the edge of another defining moment in her career. The question was no longer whether Alex Eala's rise was real. She had already answered that. Now she had a chance to prove just how far that rise could take her. The Western and Southern Open, now known as the Cincinnati Open, is a $7.4 million WTA 1000 event. And for Alex Eala, it represents one of the biggest stages she has ever stepped onto. the moment has been building for weeks. Eala did not arrive in Cincinnati as an unknown prospect hoping to make a name for herself. She arrived as a WTA champion, a top 20 player, and one of the most talked about young stars in women's tennis. She was riding enormous momentum after claiming her first WTA Tour title at the Mubadala City DC Open, where she defeated world number 3 Jessica Pegula in the final. She then followed that breakthrough with a round of 16 appearance at the Canadian Open in Toronto, continuing an incredible run on North American hard courts. Her results had pushed her to a new career high around number 18 in the live WTA rankings. And suddenly the conversation around Eala had changed completely. She was no longer simply trying to break into the elite. She was beginning to look like someone who belonged there. But waiting across the net was a player whose resume represented exactly what Eala was trying to become. Amanda Anisimova, at just 24 years old, had already experienced some of the biggest moments tennis can offer. She had reached 2 Grand Slam finals in 2025, making the championship matches at both the US Open and Wimbledon. She had also captured 2 WTA 1000 titles, winning the Qatar Open and China Open, and had climbed as high as number 3 in the world. Earlier this season, she reached the quarterfinals of the Australian Open, adding another deep Grand Slam run to an already impressive career. Anisimova was not simply another top 10 opponent. She was a player who had already beaten elite competition on the biggest stages in the sport. And this time, she would have home court advantage. The Cincinnati crowd promised to be divided between American supporters backing Anisimova and the passionate Filipino community that had followed Eala throughout the North American swing. By now, the presence of Filipino fans at Eala's matches had become one of the defining stories of her season. Stadiums were filling up, flags were appearing everywhere, and the atmosphere around her matches was becoming impossible to ignore. Anisimova knew exactly what she was walking into. She admitted that she had never faced Eala before, but she had been watching her incredible season and understood that she was facing a player who had developed not only an impressive game, but an enormous fan base. What made Anisimova's comments even more interesting was the confidence behind them. She did not complain about the crowd. She did not view the Filipino support as a problem. Instead, she embraced it. She said she loved playing in packed stadiums and enjoyed the energy of a great atmosphere. Even though she expected most of the fans to be cheering for Eala, she planned to use that noise as motivation. For Anisimova, the challenge was not something to avoid. It was something she wanted to experience. But Eala had her own source of confidence, and it came from the numbers. She had already established an extraordinary record against top 10 opponents despite being so young. She had defeated some of the biggest names in the sport, including Iga Swiatek, Jessica Pegula, Elena Rybakina, Madison Keys, Coco Gauff, Jasmine Paolini, and Alina Svitolina. Those victories had come in different tournaments, under different circumstances, and against players with completely different styles. That consistency was becoming the most convincing evidence that Eala's breakthrough was not a one-tournament wonder, that a victory over Anisimova would give Eala another massive milestone, her 10th career win against a top 10 opponent. It would also add another top 10 victory to an already remarkable 2026 season, and potentially move her one step closer to another deep run at a WTA 1000 tournament. And there was even more waiting beyond this match, that if Eala could get past Anisimova, she would move into the round of 16, where she could face either reigning Wimbledon champion Linda Noskova or Clara Tauson. That would create yet another major opportunity for the Filipina star to test herself against elite opposition and continue collecting the kind of ranking points that could completely reshape her position in the women's game. Eala's mindset after defeating Gabriela Ruse showed exactly where her head was. She said she felt she had played well, felt the ball well, remained focused, and did a good job of keeping herself in the zone. Those words may sound simple, but they reveal the biggest change in her game. Eala is beginning to look comfortable in situations that once would have felt overwhelming. She is learning how to manage pressure, control her emotions, and stay locked into the moment even when the stakes become enormous. And the stakes in Cincinnati were enormous. The $7.4 million prize purse made this one of the biggest tournaments of the season, and the champion would leave with more than $1 million in prize money along with 1,000 ranking points. For any player, that kind of reward can transform a season. For Eala, however, the value of a deep Cincinnati run went far beyond money. It was about momentum. The U.S. Open was approaching rapidly, with the Grand Slam beginning on August 30th at Flushing Meadows in New York. Every match in Cincinnati represented another opportunity for Eala to sharpen her game, test herself against elite competition, and build the confidence needed before stepping onto the biggest stage of all. A strong run could send her into New York with belief that she could compete with anyone in the draw. That is why Cincinnati mattered so much. This was not simply another tournament. It was another chapter in a season that had already transformed Eala's career. Only a relatively short time ago, she was fighting to establish herself among the world's best. Now she was entering a WTA 1000 event as a top 20 player, a champion, a proven giant killer, and one of the most recognizable young stars on the tour. And perhaps the most fascinating part was that she still had something to prove. Could she defeat another top 10 opponent? Could she handle the pressure of a packed stadium? Could she continue her incredible North American hardcourt run? Could she turn another breakthrough opportunity into another major victory? Those were the questions surrounding Eala as she prepared to walk onto the court against Amanda Anisimova. Because this was no longer about whether Eala could surprise the tennis world. The tennis world already knew her name. Now the challenge was proving that she could stay at the highest level. That a young woman from the Philippines had arrived in Cincinnati fresh from avenging a painful defeat from 2 years earlier. She had already lifted her first WTA trophy. She had already beaten some of the biggest names in the sport. She had already watched her ranking rise dramatically. And now, standing between her and the round of 16 was another top 10 star with Grand Slam experience and a massive home crowd behind her. The stage could hardly have been bigger, the pressure could hardly have been greater, and the opportunity could hardly have been more important. For Eala, the revenge story may have started with Gabriela Ruse, but the bigger story was just beginning. The Eala Express had arrived in Cincinnati, and now the entire tennis world was watching to see whether it could keep moving forward.